This is my raspberry patch. I love plucking off a wonderful ripe raspberry at the end of the season, or getting a nice big harvest and making raspberry jam. One of my absolute favorites. And I love that you can just start with a handful of raspberry plants, and in a few years you'll have hundreds. But of course, that's one of the biggest problems with raspberries. You start with just a few plants, and in a few years, you have hundreds. Join me today as I share with you some thoughts on how to control your raspberries and propagate them along the way. Hi, I'm Gardener Scott, and I love the way my raspberry patch is filling in. About 3 years ago, when I first moved to this house, one of the very first things I did was to put in these red raspberries that I had brought from my previous garden. I put in about 6 to 8 plants, and they've filled out pretty nicely. 2 years ago, I put 6 yellow raspberry plants right here, and 1 year ago, in the back, I put in 6 black raspberry plants. The intent is for this whole space to be filled with raspberries. But I do need to be able to get in between the different types of raspberries and be able to harvest the fruit when it's ready at the end of the season. Until this point, I just let them go. But now, in this 3rd year for these plants, they're starting to take over. As the raspberry plants grow strong and healthy, the roots begin to spread. And then periodically, the roots will send up a cane as they spread. You never know how far those roots are going to spread. From this main cluster, I have some plants that are 5 feet away that are just beginning to pop up. And over here, these are 4 feet away from the primary plants. It's time for me and Mala to deal with these. In a wide open area, I could allow them to just spread as much as I want. But in this area, these are perennial plants. This is part of my pollinator garden. And these raspberries are starting to interfere with these perennial plants. They have to go. As I take care of these raspberries that have spread too far, there are a couple things to think about. First off, if I just pull the plant, the root is probably going to stay behind, and more plants will pop up from that root. So I need to remove both the plant and the roots. And herbicides really aren't a good option, because if I spray these raspberries trying to kill them, well, the root is still connected to the main group, and I could be killing all the rest of my raspberries. So, it comes down to a shovel or a trowel to dig up the plants and as many of the roots as I can. I want to disrupt the rest of these perennials as little as possible, but there is some digging involved. This little raspberry right here seems to be the last one. So this is where I'm going to begin. And I'll just dig down and uncover this young plant and the one next to it. And as I move aside the soil, I can get down to the roots of the raspberry plant. And chances are they're going to be connected. And so here's the one root and the plant. And now I just need to try to trace these roots back to the source. And so tracing this root back, I'll strip away the soil, dig down, and try to get to the point where I can find the primary root. Now this can take time, but if you want to get all of the roots out, this is really the approach to take. And so looking at this plant, you can actually see underground, this is the beginning of a whole new raspberry. That would have been a cane that was sent up. And so a lot of times they're connected. Here's another one right here. Let's see if maybe these two join together. Yep, sure enough. So this root that was way over here is connected to this plant right here. And following it along, it actually looks like this one might be a completely separate plant. But I'll just trace this back, trying to remove all the roots and removing all of those potential new shoots, like this one right here. If I had just pulled the original plant, this would have grown into a new raspberry cane. And so I'm just tracing this back. The closer we get to the main clump, the deeper the roots tend to be, and you'll encounter more. And these extra plants I just drop on the ground as mulch. So you may find that while you're tracing back, you'll come across another one that maybe hadn't popped up yet and is sending roots forward. So here's a new root that I hadn't seen before. Here's the one that I'm tracing back. And I'm going to go to right about here. So this is where I want the patch to end. I'll just go ahead and chop off the roots at this point. And these were all potential new raspberry plants that were going to grow into this section of the garden where I didn't want them. But now my patch stops right here, at least for these plants. These plants are also extending out too far, but these nice little clumps of raspberry canes are perfect for digging up and potting up and propagating for future growth. So I'll basically do the same thing, only this time I have some potting soil in these gallon pots. Now, as I dig down and loosen up this raspberry with Mala's help, I'll do the same thing, trying to get as much of the root as possible. And then when I have the plant and a pretty good root system, I'll put it into a pot, and this potting soil is ideal for the roots to continue growing. And the more I do this, the more raspberry plants I have to share or to plant in another section of my garden. And this is how I've propagated hundreds of raspberry plants over the years. Digging up these clumps, trying to make sure that there's some roots, and occasionally you'll see on these roots that there will be more canes popping up. So don't be surprised after you pot them that you'll have additional canes showing up in these pots before you can get them in the ground. Whenever I propagate plants like this, I do it in small batches. I don't want these to dry out, so I have a watering can standing by, and I'll water them right away. Want to keep the soil nice and moist and give these plants the best chance for survival. Ideally, you want to do this on a cool or overcast day, but I need to get it done today, and it's pretty hot and sunny out. So after watering these plants, I'm going to put them in a nice, sheltered, shady location. You can expect some initial wilting. These plants are stressed from being dug up. Most of them are going to recover. Propagating like this, I usually have about an 80% success rate if I keep them sheltered initially and keep the soil moist. And then after about 3 or 4 days, I'll put these out into the sun and they'll usually brighten right up. As I survey this patch, the black raspberries really haven't spread much. This is just their first full year of growth. But the yellow raspberries are starting to fill in the space between, and I want this to be a pathway, so some of those are going to have to come out. I designed the edge of this patch to be this wooden log, and they're starting to get close to it. That's exactly what I want. So I'm going to leave all of these alone. I will take out some of these plants between the yellow and the red just so I can get in to harvest. But it's this area over here I'm the most concerned by. I have a whole bunch of these raspberry plants that are starting to grow right up to my asparagus bed, and I definitely don't want them in that bed. So all of these plants that are close to the bed need to go. As I deal with these plants that are beginning to overrun the asparagus, I'll do one of those two things. Either just dig up the plant and drop it as mulch, or pot it up to be used later. I don't always know when I start digging which of those is going to happen. Sometimes I'm trying to get that root bundle and I end up snapping off the cane. Well, that one's lost. So often I try to save everything. If it's got a good root system, I'll pot it up. If not, I discard it. And at the end of cleaning up my raspberry patch, I just have to wait and see how many actual pots of raspberries I have. Because this will be a new raspberry patch. I have fruit trees, I have fruit bushes, and now I want more canes in this area. I have blackberries at that end, and I'll have raspberries at this end. And I'll continue to grow those plants. Now, the red raspberries in particular are heritage variety, and I've been growing heritage for over 20 years. They do very well for me. So well that all of those plants can be traced back to the original handful of heritage plants that I first put in the garden a couple decades ago. That's how effective this method of propagation can be. You can extend your beds from one area of the yard to another area of the yard, or from one garden to a completely new garden in a new part of the city, or maybe in a new state. The option is completely up to you. I still have a lot to clean up and a lot to pot up. I'm Gardener Scott. Enjoy gardening.